as you know, this Colin Kaepernick situation with the kneeling and all these NFL players is now back in the news. I've been pretty consistent with my opinions on Colin Kaepernick. I don't think he's helped this issue any. And to many minorities out there that disagree with me, their response is he's raising awareness. Well, what good has that done? Okay, we're aware. We need action now. It's time for action. Now, as you know, Roger Goodell and many of the owners in the NFL were upset about the kneeling, and they wanted it to stop. They said, wait in the locker room. A lot of people feel like it disrespects the flag. I actually don't think it disrespects the flag at all, because that's not the player's intention. That's just my personal opinion. So with that being said, Roger Goodell is now apologizing for claiming that he did not listen to players when they took a knee the last few years. So have a listen to Roger Goodell. Here it is.
It has been a difficult time for our country, in particular, black people in our country. First, my condolences to the families of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all the families who have endured police brutality. We, the National Football League, condemn racism and the systematic oppression of black people. We, the National Football League, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest. We, the National Football League, believe Black Lives Matter. I personally protest with you and want to be part of the much-needed change in this country. Without black players, there would be no National Football League. And the protests around the country are emblematic of the centuries of silence, inequality, and oppression of black players, coaches, fans, and staff. We are listening. I am listening. And I will be reaching out to players who have raised their voices and others on how we can improve and go forward for a better and more united NFL family.
Yeah, why don't you put your hundreds of millions of dollars, Roger Goodell, put your money where your mouth is. Have you been out at any of these Black Lives Matter protests, or are you sitting in your home, in your $30 million home with your wife, lounging by the pool and then talking to owners? Roger Goodell, put your money where your mouth is. If you really believe in what the Black Lives Matter movement is, then why don't you protest? Heck, even I went to one of the protests. Why don't you protest, Roger Goodell? He is so full of crap. He's doing it because he knows it's timely, and he already has the owners on his side, and now he wants the players on his side. This is all about money for Roger Goodell. Now let's go to the actual players who mean something. Roger Goodell to me means nothing.
Been 10 days.
Okay, so these are the NFL players that recorded a video.
A bunch of players, like Patrick Mahomes and some other stars.
Yeah. And I think they did a really good job, by the way, but we'll comment on it after. These are NFL players that recorded a video about George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. Have a listen to this.
It's been 10 days since George Floyd was brutally murdered.
How many times do we need to ask you to listen to your players?
What will it take
for one of us to be murdered by police brutality?
What if I was George Floyd?
If I was George Floyd?
What if I was George Floyd?
If I was George Floyd?
If I was George Floyd? If I was George Floyd?
I am George Floyd.
I am Breonna Taylor.
I am Ahmaud Arbery.
I am Eric Garner.
I am Laquan McDonald.
I am Tamir Rice.
I am Trayvon Martin.
I am Walter Scott.
I am Michael Brown Jr.
I am Samuel Du Bois.
I am Frank Smart.
I'm Philip White.
I am Jordan Baker.
We will not be silenced.
We assert our right
To peacefully protest.
It shouldn't take this long to admit.
So, on behalf of the National Football League,
This is what we, the players,
Would like to hear you state.
We, the National Football League, condemn racism and the systematic oppression of black people.
we, the National Football League,
admit wrong and silencing our players from peacefully protesting.
we, the National Football League,
Believe Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
All right, so you kind of lost me with Michael Brown. Let me start with the positive. I think it's great that these players are making this video and they're supporting Black Lives Matter movement. I think it's great that they're taking the time to say that they believe in the cause. I think there's nothing wrong with that, and I think everything in that video was great, except you lost me with Michael Brown. I wish these people would stop bringing up Michael Brown. Michael Brown is not a martyr. Michael Brown was a thug, a criminal who had just committed a strong-arm robbery and attacked a police officer. Stop bringing up Michael Brown. He should not be a part of that list. He died because he attacked a police officer and went after his gun. Now, with that, with that being said, I just wanted to read Donald Trump's tweet. Go ahead, JD.
No, I mean, and if you're talking about being George Floyd, then you would be a career criminal who had served 7 or 6 different jail sentences and who had put a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach while her home was being invaded. None of these players are George Floyd. None of these players are felons. None of these players are career criminals, and I'm guessing that all of the players are typically compliant with police officers.
Yeah, but that's, as you know, that's not what they're trying to convey in this video.
I understand.
It's not about George Floyd's past.
The expectation right now nationwide is that what happened to George Floyd can happen to anyone, and I think that is totally off base. In fact, they just did a study, and white police officers kill African Americans at the same rate as black police officers do. So it's police officers, and in general, if that's the case, then you have to factor in a lack of compliance and the fact that people that just there is a culture that does not respect the police, and I think a lot of it started with what happened with NWA back in the early 1990s.
All right, well, we're getting in the weeds. I mean, I understand what the players are doing. I don't agree with everything they said in that video, but speaking of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has injected himself into this many times. For example, when it comes to Colin Kaepernick and when it comes to players taking a knee in the last couple of years, Donald Trump has dedicated 104 tweets. 104 tweets to just kneeling. Okay, when it comes to specifically police brutality, kneeling on someone's neck, Donald Trump has not tweeted about that once. And once again, Donald Trump last night, perhaps on the toilet, was tweeting again. And here's what Donald Trump said in regards to this issue. Quote, could it be even remotely possible that in Roger Goodell's rather interesting statement of peace and reconciliation, he was intimating that it would be okay for the players to kneel or not stand for the national anthem, therefore disrespecting country and our flag. That is what Donald Trump said. Now, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but instead of Donald Trump, our president, being worried about NFL players kneeling during the national anthem, shouldn't he worry about the big picture, which is the racial injustice, the systematic racism? Now, there are people on the right that are going to say systematic racism does not exist. Well, those people are idiots. They're complicit. They're either ignorant or racist. It's very simple. Of course it exists. As a white person, how many times have you gone into a Walmart or a Target and been followed because of suspicion of shoplifting? It happens to my friends that happen to be minorities all the time. How many times have you been pulled over by a police officer for absolutely no reason? I've actually been in the car as a passenger with some of my friends who have literally been pulled over because they are black. It's not just police officers kneeling on someone's neck. It's not just about physical police brutality. It's about harassment. I wish the president would talk about that once in a while, but instead he seems to hold more anger towards Colin Kaepernick and NFL players kneeling during the national anthem, and I find that very, very, very troubling, and it speaks volumes about Donald Trump's character if we didn't already know what it was.
I'll tell you this: when I was 19 years old, I was pulled over, and there's a man who shares the exact same name that I have, my real name, in a town that was I think 30 miles west of where I grew up, and this guy was a career criminal. He was on a couple of long police chases. He was a felon. And so when I was pulled over and they looked at my ID, about 4 other police officers showed up because they thought that I was that person. And I think you have to factor that in. When you pull someone over, or when you come in contact with someone like a George Floyd, who has a violent history, who is by all accounts a career criminal, and he is high on fentanyl, and he has, all these things are factoring in. I think that as a police officer, that changes the approach, or at least that changes your thought process on how you approach something like that, Brian. And none of that is being factored in. When I was 28 years old, I was involved in a really crazy situation where someone was driving a car. They were intoxicated, and they drove down some train tracks. And thankfully I was not hurt, but I got out of the car. And the police were called. The police came down. I did not give up the name of the driver, and the police, 3 police officers attacked me and put me in a chokehold because I was in a car that was driving down train tracks. I mean, you have to factor in that in some of in probably 99% of these situations, there is a reason why the police is being confrontational. There is a reason why, whether it's a lack of compliance or the person that's being pulled over or being dealt with has a history of being a criminal. You have to factor all that stuff in, and that's not being factored. The thought process right now is that every single African American person is going to be treated the way that George Floyd was, and George Floyd
there's not one person in the country that thinks that way.
He is an absolute exception, Brian.
There is not one person. Okay, you got to let me.
Obviously, I'm not suggesting that he wasn't murdered, because he was murdered.
Can I
and Officer Chauvin has been charged with second-degree murder. Those 3 have gotten aiding and abetting. That's very clear.
Okay,
and the Minneapolis Police Department is the only police department in the country at the time that allowed that particular neck restraint.
Okay, you got to let me.
But if you think that you just have a chance of being treated like that as an everyday human being, I think that is completely incorrect.
Right, so
and right now that thought process is being used to divide the country and as an indictment on police officers. And look at what's happening in Minneapolis. I mean, things are coming out of it that are very, very negative, but none of that's being mentioned. And to me, that's very, very troubling, Brian.
There is not one reasonable person in this country that thinks that every single black person is going to be murdered by police. I have no idea why you would make that statement. It is factually inaccurate. It is not even close to being true. That's number one. Number two, you are missing the big picture once again. And I think, sadly, many people who are white in this country, I shouldn't say many, but there are some people who are white in this country that are also missing the big picture, which is this. This movement is not just about police officers killing innocent black people. In fact, that's not even the big issue here. The big issue is the way systemic racism is handled in this country, the way it's treated, the way police officers treat minorities, not necessarily killing black people, but harassment, police brutality, and what I just mentioned, which is this. I know many friends of mine who are followed in Walmarts and Targets because of the color of their skin. And by the way, if you don't believe me, all you have to do is go on YouTube and see some of these videos, and it has absolutely nothing to do with their record or if they committed a crime. It has to do with a dumb employee that is racist, that is following somebody. Well, you can shake. Hold on.
Well, I mean, I've actually experienced this myself.
All right.
Brian.
Well, if I can finish, you can shake your head if you want to. And maybe you've had someone follow you in a Walmart.
I have.
Okay, that's fine.
I was there at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Fine.
I had sweatpants and a shirt and sandals on. I didn't look the part of someone who was coming there to purchase something. And that's not being factored in either.
You got to let me finish. Let me finish. But
there are circumstances to everything, Brian.
To actually say that you are treated the same in this country as a minority is absurd. To think that because one time maybe you were followed in a Walmart. These are things that
I just gave you 2 other scenarios outside of this.
Okay, and I'll give you some other scenarios. Many minorities in this country, this happens to them on a daily basis. A daily basis. Doesn't happen several times in their life. It happens all the time. One of my friends who happens to be a sports reporter and anchor in this town, he says it happens to him dozens of times every year. Dozens of times where he's followed in a store because they think he's going to shoplift or he's pulled over by police. I've seen it happen to him several times just when I've been hanging out with him alone. So the idea that we are going to say that, well, it happens to me also, I'm sorry. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened to you. What I am saying is that it happens to minorities a hell of a lot more. We're going to take your phone calls on this at 702-257-5396. Again, that number to call if you want to be a part of the conversation is 702-257-5396. Why is it that Donald Trump isn't tweeting about racial injustice, systemic racism? Why isn't he tweeting about that stuff? Instead, over 100 times over the last few years, he's tweeted about NFL players taking a knee. Oh, yeah, and by the way, he called those players sons of bitches. He didn't call that cop a son of a bitch, did he? But he calls NFL players that are kneeling sons of bitches.
Well, his low approval ratings and low poll numbers against Biden apparently have gotten to his people, his advisors, because CNN is now reporting that Trump is planning a, quote, race speech, a big race speech that he'll give to make himself look presidential.
No, and that was actually yesterday, and that's a biased statement there, Stein. You shouldn't be biased as our producer. What do you mean? That being said, I think those polls are complete and utter BS. Donald Trump is going to trounce Joe Biden in 2020. But they've been discussing. He was discussing doing a possible race speech as early as yesterday. That this isn't a new thing. That came out yesterday. But if he's going to do it, I think that he should probably make a statement of some sort.
Okay. Yeah, I read an article that people within the White House are nervous about his presidency slipping away, and that part of that he's going to be more positive and more accommodating to Black Americans.
Which makes sense.
That speech would fit in with that.
Quickly, as before we get to the phone calls at 257-5396, as you know, Drew Brees made some idiotic statements. I think the timing of it was what made it really idiotic. And a lot of his players in the NFL and LeBron James, people across the country have criticized him for it. He apologized for it. But why is his wife now involved? His wife says, we are the problem. First of all, Drew Brees' wife does not speak for me. Just shut up. She didn't make the statement. Stop it. I don't want to hear from you. She went on this diatribe, and she wrote it on the Drew Brees Dream Foundation page. She posted it on Instagram, and she wrote this big letter. I don't want to hear from Drew Brees' wife. Don't say I'm part of the problem. Your husband might be a part of the problem because he's a dope when it comes to judgment and timing. Let's take some phone calls. 702-257-5396. Let's go to Kurt. Kurt, you're up first up here on the Vegas Take. What's going on?
Hey, what's up, Kurt?
Hey, what's going on? As much as I usually agree with you, JD, I think Brian's correct on this. I used to think like you, JD, and then I married a black woman, and let me tell you, it's very real, and it's almost every day. And it happens a lot, and it's way more consistent. It does happen in reverse. I've experienced it in reverse as well, but it's way more consistent in the black culture. It really is.
And are those police officers almost always Caucasian?
We're not talking about police officers.
No,
We're talking about
the police. I was talking about daily,
that.
You're saying being at a store.
Yeah, we went to my mother was an honorary Elks member because my dad was an Elks member. We went to the Elks. They told us to go away, but then my mom the day before I went with my sister's kids who were all white, no problems. Hi, welcome, no problems at all. And then we go in there and they say, oh, we can't help you. You're not members. Da, da, da. I mean, it happens. It really does. And I used to think just like you, JD, until I was married to a black woman. Let me tell you, it happens. It happens way more.
Well, do you think that the widespread looting that was caught on video after these protests is going to help that at all? Because the answer is no.
Name me one person that's
and all that, JD. I basically agree with you, but I'm talking.
Name me one person that thinks the riots and people breaking the law is going to help their cause. There's not one reasonable person that thinks it's going to help their cause. That's a completely different subject. Sir, what you are saying is exactly what I am saying. All I can say is I'm not married to an African American, but I think if you have logic, and by the way, I'm glad that your wife, I'm sorry, sir, is that who you said, your wife?
Yeah, my wife.
I'm glad. I am so glad that your wife was able to. I mean, listen, I'm not glad that your wife has to go through that. I wish we didn't have to deal with that. No one did. But I'm glad that you were able to see that through your wife and understand what minorities have to go through. So you agree with me that as a that is white privilege. I mean, that's a part of white privilege, is it not?
I would say, yeah, in some sort of fashion. I think there's privileges in every way, shape, or form. But, yeah, that would be.
Can I ask you another question, sir? The fact that your wife is African American, I mean, does that help you understand a little bit more what this Black Lives Movement is all about? I mean, for the most part?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with it all, but, yeah, I do understand it more for sure.
All right, fair enough. Well, I appreciate your perspective, sir. Thank you, Kurt.
Yeah, good call, Kurt.
Appreciate your call. There's a white man who didn't understand what minorities have to go through on a regular basis. His wife is African American, and since marrying his wife or since dating her, whatever the case may be, he now understands what she has to go through her eyes. I think that is very telling, and that is, and I try that. See, folks, you don't have to be married to someone who's African American to understand. Listen to African Americans. Listen to what they have to say. Doesn't mean you have to agree with all of them, but listen. Let's get back to the phone calls.
You know, when I'm at a grocery store and someone comes up and says, "Do you need any help finding anything, sir?" Is that them thinking that I'm going to steal anything? And
That's not what I'm talking about.
You're not talking about. You don't think that the sportscaster you're talking about is a little paranoid, and every single time he goes to the store and someone at the store tries to help him out, that he's thinking that it's only because of the color of his skin.
People ask me that
because they're afraid
as well.
Because they're afraid that he is going to steal from that particular store. Because that particular friend, the friend that you're talking about, he dresses very well.
That's
by the
not
way.
what I'm talking about. You're totally misrepresenting what
no,
I'm saying.
not. I'm
Right.
just saying.
Let me get to another
I think there's a little more to it than just. I mean, you go to the Walmart.
Well, you can think that all you want.
Any Walmart in Las
we got to get
Vegas.
some more calls.
You have
I'll address that.
minorities. I mean, honestly, in most Walmarts in Las Vegas, I am a minority as a Caucasian male. That's just the way it is, especially in a place like Las Vegas. So I find that very hard to believe that that's occurring here in Las Vegas, Brian.
All right, I will address it on the other side of the break, but I want to try to squeeze in one more call at 257-5396. David, I got about a minute for you, my man. What's going on?
Hey, what's up, David?
How you doing, guys?
Good.
JD, you got to take your head out of the sand, man. I mean, that's ridiculous to say that these incidents that you mentioned happen in your life is tantamount to what happens to African Americans every single day. And the previous caller, right on the money. I'm a white man. I dated a black woman for a while, and it's every single day occurrence almost for people in the African American community. You go into a restaurant, the way you get treated, the way you get treated in the store, over and over and over. Things that I never thought I would see in 2020, I saw it repeatedly over and over and over and over and over. And there's no comparison whatsoever to what you're talking about as far as the way you got treated on a couple of occasions. Totally ridiculous to try to make that comparison. So I really think you're very naive or misguided.
No, I'm not making a comparison. I'm just bringing up situations where the same thing happened to me, and the backing and the reasoning behind it. Because I was in one situation. Someone thought that I was somebody I was not, who was a career criminal, and in another situation, I was in a place that I should not have been at that time, and the police needed to be there for those circumstances.